Thanks to the efforts of modern fruit breeders, any garden can have a fruit tree. There are fruit trees that can keep their entire lives in a pot and can be kept to just 1.2 meters tall with pruning. So no matter how tiny a space you have, even if you have no garden at all, even if you've just got a balcony, you can have a fruit tree in a pot. So there's lots of wonderful varieties available. Nearly all fruit trees these days are grafted. So that means they take the roots of one particular type of tree and they graft on the top section of another. So what they do is they'll take an apple or a pear or a plum or whatever it is that's really vigorous and really delicious and really wonderful, and they'll stick it on the roots of a tree that's really quite small and well behaved. So instead of having massive big fruit tree that no way would fit in your garden, suddenly it's got little tiny rootstock that's going to keep it nice and small and compact, and you can grow it in any space. So the different types of tree all take different rootstock. You can't graft an apple top onto a plum bottom. It doesn't work that way. When it comes to apples, the smallest rootstock you're going to get is called M27, and that will give you an apple tree that you can grow in a pot and keep to just 1.2 meters tall with pruning. Slightly bigger than that is M26, so that's going to give you a fruit tree that really wants to get 1.8 to 2.4 meters tall. Again, you can keep it a wee bit smaller than that with pruning. So if it says on the label what the rootstock is, you know exactly what you're going to be in for. The smallest rootstock that you're going to get for pears and quince, they both take the same rootstock, is quince C. That's what this pear tree is grafted onto. And that's going to give you a tree between 2.4 and 3 meters tall, which again, you can keep small with pruning. You can keep a pear tree that is on that quince C pruned so it's just 1.2 meters tall, and it will grow in a pot its whole life. It can be a little bit confusing with all the different types of rootstocks, but if you look at the label, if it says patio, if it says pillar, if it says column, if it says suitable for growing in pots, if it says dwarf or ultra dwarf, or ideally if it tells you the exact height that it's going to grow to, you will know that it is a smaller fruit tree. This apple tree has been grown on dwarfing rootstock. That means it's never really going to get any taller than this. And if you wanted to, you could keep it even smaller through pruning. It still has a large quantity of fruit on it. It's grown in the ground here, but you could grow a tree like this in a pot as well if you wanted to. Dwarfing rootstocks mean that there are fewer roots in the ground, so the tree is going to need support. We're in a walled garden here, so it's really sheltered from the wind, but in general you need to stake a dwarf tree for its entire life. This is really easy to do. You just simply put a stake or two in the ground beside the tree and then tie the tree to it, and it just stops it rocking around as much in the wind. This pear tree is a conference variety, which is self-fertile. That means I'll still get pears on this tree, even if it's the only pear tree for miles. Not all fruit trees are self-fertile, so make sure you check for that on the label. Really good self-fertile varieties of pear are Conference, Concord, Doyen du Camise, which is sometimes just called Camise, and Williams or Red Williams are both self-fertile. So keep an eye out for those on the dwarfing rootstock. Really good self-fertile apples include Granny Smith, which is green, Spartan, which is red, Green Sleeves, Braeburn, Cox's self-fertile, make sure it's the self-fertile Cox's one, and James Grieve. So as long as the fruit tree that you're buying says self-fertile, you only need one of those fruit trees. If it's not self-fertile, you'll need another tree that's the same species but a different variety to cross-pollinate it. So make your life easy and just get a self-fertile one. Now let's have a talk about pots for a minute. If you're growing a fruit tree in a pot, you're expecting a lot out of that tree. You're expecting it to put on growth, to produce blossoms, to produce fruit for you. So you need to look after it. You need to be keeping it really well watered. You need to give it a fruit encouraging fertilizer like liquid comfrey feed or tomato fertilizer every week through the fruiting season. And in the winter, when it's dormant, you want to take it out of the pot, get rid of as much of the old compost as you can, and every other year you can cut back any of the roots that are getting a bit crowded, and it will put out lovely fresh roots and be a lot healthier for it. So never take off more than about 30% of the roots, pop it back into the pot with fresh compost. If you want to, you can cheat. And every other year, instead of taking the whole thing out of the pot, you can just scrape off the surface compost and put fresh compost and a nice dose of general purpose fertilizer like fish blood and bone. So as long as every other year you're taking it out of the pot and giving a really lovely compost refresh, your fruit tree is going to be nice and happy for you. This is a fig tree that I bought recently. Now, when I bought it, it was in a pot this size. So you can see I've put it in a slightly larger pot, but not a massive pot. If you take a little tiny plant like this and stick it into a huge big pot full of compost, its roots aren't going to be able to reach out to the edges of that compost before all the nutrients are washed away with watering. It's just a waste. You're far better to start it in a slightly larger pot, and next year increase it again to a slightly larger pot, and the year after a slightly larger pot. Now, figs like to be a little bit root bound anyway. It makes them fruit better if their roots are slightly restricted. Basically, the plant is producing fruit so that it can set its seeds and make more fruit trees. That's its whole goal in life. So if it feels a little bit restricted and feels like it's maybe under a little bit of pressure, it's going to produce as much fruit as it can so it can sow its seeds far and wide and make more lovely fruit trees. So it doesn't hurt to keep these in a slightly smaller pot. You can keep a fig tree in a pot just 30 centimetres as a final pot size. Now, I would rather that it was in sort of 45 or 50 centimetres, just because the smaller the pot, the more work the watering is. So I would tend towards a slightly larger pot if you've got space for it. So your figs, 30 to 50 centimetres, your apples, pears, cherries, everything else, 50 to 60 centimetres is really what you want to be looking at. Let's have a chat about cherries and plums. So even if they are on dwarfing rootstock, which would be Gisela 5 for your cherries and Pixie for your plums, even if they're on those dwarfing rootstocks, these are trees with ambition. They are going to want to get tall. They would love to get 3 metres. They would love to get a little bit taller than 3 metres if you let them. So if you are buying a so-called dwarf cherry tree, make sure you check on the label what size it says it's eventually going to get to, and then expect it to get a little bit bigger, because these trees love to grow. I am going to show you my cherry tree in the front garden, which supposedly is on dwarfing rootstock. Wait till you see how big it's gotten. Yeah, really dwarf. Don't let that put you off. I got this tree as part of a very inexpensive tree bundle from an online supplier, and I'm not sure whether it actually is on the Gisela 5 rootstock or whether they've accidentally given me a slightly bigger one, but I have let this tree just grow. If I wanted to keep it smaller, I could do with pruning, but it's beautiful. It gives me gorgeous blossoms in the spring. The birds eat most of the cherries off it, to be fair, but I love birds, so I don't mind that, and it's a beautiful part of the structure in the garden. But it does go to show that there is a tree for every size and every place in every garden. Fruit trees, and especially fruit trees grown on dwarfing rootstocks, can be trained into all sorts of space-saving shapes. I'm in my garden at home, standing in front of my lovely Espalier pear tree. Espalier is a training technique that works really well for apples and pears. You need to start it when the tree is quite nice and young. You can start with a whip, which is basically when the tree is just one single stem, and that would be called a maiden whip. Plant your whip and then decide what height you want your first row of branches to be, and then cut the top off the tree at that point. If you look at the trunk of the tree, you should see little nodules that tell you where it wants to grow new branches, so cut just above a nodule. Then it will hopefully sprout 3 new shoots. You train one of those vertically to continue as the trunk, and then start to train the other 2 horizontally out to the sides to be your first level of branches. Once that central vertical shoot has reached the height you want for your next level of branches, you cut it off again, and it will usually give you 3 shoots, 1 to continue as the trunk and 2 to carry on out to the sides. Then you just continue cutting the top off the trunk each time it reaches the height for the next level of branches until the tree is the height you want it to be. You will need to use some sort of support like canes or horizontal wires or a frame to tie the branches into in order to get the correct shape, and your branches should be a little over a foot apart, 14 to 16 inches or 35 to 45 centimetres. You can also start with a slightly more mature tree that already has several branches in roughly the right configuration, which is what we did with our pear tree. Just work with whatever you're able to get. You should be able to get one new horizontal row started per year. You can also buy trees already trained into different shapes at garden centres, but it's very satisfying to train them yourself and it's much cheaper. There's a quite similar method of training to Espalier that's called Stepover, and it's ideal for apples and pears. Basically, it's the same as Espalier, single vertical trunk, and when you get to the first layer of branches, which is only going to be a foot or two off the ground, you train them horizontally and then stop the tree. So you've just got like a T sticking up out of the ground. And you can run those top horizontal branches together so you get a lovely long continuous run. As the name suggests, they're nice and low, so you can actually step over the top of them. So they're not really a barrier, they take up no space whatsoever, and they're wonderful grown against a low wall or grown as the edging to a bed. So again, you're going to want your dwarfing rootstock for those, but because they're so low to the ground, they don't generally need a lot of support or staking. Fan training is ideal for cherries, plums, peaches, nectarines, anything in that family will love to be fan trained. Ideally, this means a short trunk at the base with a fan of angled branches coming out from the top of the trunk, but if you're using a tree that already has several branches, just fan them out as best you can, cutting out any that are in the wrong position or can't be trained. I will do a more detailed video on training fruit trees, so please make sure you subscribe and click the bell so that you'll be able to see it, because trained fruit trees are such an amazing way to bring fruit into a small garden space. This tree is what's called Candelabra trained, so that means it's got its vertical stem in the middle and then it has loops of branches. It's really just a variant on fan training. Similar to the Espalier shape, you begin by cutting the trunk at the level you want your first level of branches, then you let 3 spurs grow and train out your side branches horizontally, but once they get to the desired length, you gently bend the edge of the branch upwards to create a lovely curve. Then when your trunk gets tall enough, you cut it off again and get your 3 shoots and repeat training the horizontal branches, but this time turn them up at the end sooner so they nest inside the shape of the lower level. When the central trunk gets to the desired height again, you can cut it, get your 3 shoots and create the final level, this time only letting the side shoots come out a short way before turning them skywards to complete that candelabra shape. So with this tree, it has a single trunk at the center and then rows of horizontal branches. And this is ideal for what's called spur fruiting fruits. So really that's your apples and your pears. As you can see, it takes up no space in the garden whatsoever. It's just growing against a wall. We have the lovely flower bed in front of it, so we haven't lost any garden space whatsoever. I've heard these described as free fruit trees because you basically get fruit for having absolutely no space in your garden taken up. You will need to prune these a couple of times a year to keep that really nice crisp shape. If you don't stay on top of the pruning, they can run a little bit wild. You will get more fruit that way, so maybe you want to do that, but we love that beautiful structured layered shape. It's really attractive against the wall, and in the spring the blossoms are just fabulous. You can hear the bees buzzing for miles. Although this is quite a well-trained fruit tree, the birds still love it. They'll come and perch on it and use it as shelter. So the bees are getting a feed, the birds are getting shelter, and then we're getting the lovely fruit from it as well. Even though it is taking up virtually no space in the garden, we still get fabulously big crops from this pear tree. Now, like most fruit trees, it tends to have a really good year with loads of fruit, and then the next year it's sort of exhausted and it gives a fairly small harvest just to build up its energy so it can give you a massive harvest again next year. So if your fruit tree is having a really good year, expect it to take a little rest next year and then bounce back again the following year. It's just part of that wonderful natural cycle. Fruit trees make such a brilliant addition to any garden. They add structure and height. You get beautiful blossoms in the spring. They encourage wildlife by being a place that birds can come and roost and shelter and sit and chat to each other. Then you get the wonderful fruit. They are just such a multitasking plant. The amount of fruit that you can get from a dwarf, well-pruned, well-looked after tree will absolutely astound you. There is a fruit tree for every garden, so what are you waiting for? Get growing.